So to me, vulnerability is sharing and listening with trust. And sometimes that happens on a mass scale, and sometimes it happens in a small, intimate way. And I think there are things about all of us that we would say everyone knows, and there are things about all of us that only one person knows.
Gabby Bernstein, a role model for spiritual seekers.
One of the loving exchanges in the tradition I lived in as a monk, there's 6 loving exchanges. They are giving and receiving gifts. It's giving and receiving food. And then the last 2 are giving and receiving confidential, vulnerable information. So actually, one of the loving exchanges in spiritual culture is to give and receive vulnerably. And to experience that from someone else. So for me, vulnerability has always been about opening up to someone that you believe can support, help, encourage, guide, steer you in a journey and a direction that's going to better your life. And so I do often, to be quite honest, reflect on today's definition of vulnerability, where it's like everyone's just like, well, tell Instagram, or you have to tell Facebook, or you have to tell everyone. And that, to me, I don't count that as a definition of vulnerability. I count that as a degree of vulnerability that you open yourself up to based on who you want to share things with. But I think vulnerability is sharing with someone who is worthy of what you're trying to share. Mm-hmm. And where you feel, as you've said many times in this conversation, where you feel that sense of safety and confidentiality and trust. So to me, vulnerability is sharing and listening with trust. And sometimes that happens on a mass scale, and sometimes it happens in a small, intimate way. And I think there are things about all of us that we would say everyone knows, and there are things about all of us that only one person knows. And there's beauty in that as much as there is in the scale. And so to me, vulnerability is really being careful and being conscious about who we share what with, because that's what vulnerability is. It's that subtlety of how we share, who we share, why we share. The question about why we share is so important, right? Vulnerability is about why we share. Are we sharing because we want to create a connection, because we want to open up so that we can let go of some baggage? Or are we sharing because we want to be perceived in certain ways? So for me, vulnerability is everything about why we share, how we share, who we share it with, and what we share.
Yeah, totally. And I want, before even Lewis, you say anything, I want to, first of all, that was beautiful. And I acknowledge that when we're vulnerable in public, it's extremely different than being vulnerable in an intimate relationship. So this is where I want to tee you up, Lewis, because I found, and we have a similar history of childhood abuse and trauma, and that trauma sending us into these very scared places. I found it much easier to be extraordinarily raw and vulnerable in front of thousands of strangers on stage than I did with my most intimate relationships. So much so that my husband was reading my latest book, which will be out in February, and it's about my trauma recovery. And some of the things I wrote in that book, he had never even really heard me say. So I'm not sure if that's been your experience, but tell us what yours has been.
Wow. Yeah, for me, I never shared anything vulnerable for most of my life until probably 30, around there. Every time something would come up, especially speaking about the sexual abuse stuff, like every time something would come up where family would ask me something, or, a girlfriend would ask me, like, why are you this way? Why do you react in this way? Why do you get angry when this happens? Why do you try to defend yourself when someone, you take something personally from someone? Why do you act this way? And I only gave them surface levels, responses. I didn't actually allow myself to be like, well, this happened and this happened. And I just never thought that was a possibility, because I just thought it was weakness. I never saw something, a model or an example like that from peers, kids, people that I had growing up with.